The rhythmic beep of heart monitors was the only sound filling the sterile hospital room. Machines blinked steadily. Tubes snaked from pale arms. In the middle of it all, little Sophie Miller, just 8 years old, lay perfectly still, her chest rising and falling with mechanical precision. Her face, though unconscious, held the softness of a child who never deserved any of this. David Miller stood beside her, holding her tiny hand in both of his. His eyes were bloodshot, jaw clenched. He hadn't slept in over 30 hours, but he wouldn't leave her side. Not after what happened. Not after the betrayal that had brought them here. The door creaked open behind him. He turned, expecting a nurse. Instead, Gloria Phelps stepped inside, heels clicking sharply against the tile. Her gray suit was immaculate, and her posture screamed control. She didn't look at Sophie. Not once. Her eyes locked onto David with the cold indifference of a bank auditor. "I didn't come to argue," she said flatly. "I came to be practical." David didn't speak. He couldn't. Gloria pulled out a thin folder from her designer bag and placed it on the counter near Sophie's bed. "This is a formal notice from the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. Your daughter's current condition and the circumstances surrounding it are creating unnecessary emotional disruption in the neighborhood." David blinked. "Excuse me." She continued, her tone dry as dust. "Several residents have complained that having a visibly life-supported child in the community is lowering morale and potentially property values." The words didn't make sense. Not at first. David stared at her like she had just started speaking another language. "Are you seriously?" His voice cracked. "You came here to talk about real estate?" "I came here," Gloria interrupted, "to let you know that there's still time to make a dignified decision. Before this gets more complicated, legally." David took a step forward. "You want us to take her off life support. She's clearly suffering. And the longer she's kept here, the more complicated this becomes for everyone." He was shaking now, not with fear, with rage. "She's not a nuisance. She's not a number on your HOA spreadsheet. She's my daughter." Gloria gave a single, slow blink. "And this is a community that values peace, order, and visual harmony. If you truly loved her, you'd want her rest, not become a symbol of decline." David stared at her in stunned silence. Gloria turned without another word and walked out, leaving the folder behind. The room felt 10 degrees colder. David turned back to Sophie and dropped to his knees beside her. His voice broke into a whisper. "I'm so sorry, baby. I never thought monsters like this existed." His hand trembled as he stroked her hair. Outside the room, faint footsteps echoed down the hall, measured, confident, merciless. "I thought monsters only lived in stories. I was wrong. I didn't move my family into a community. I moved them into a war zone. Let me tell you how it all began. Just 6 months earlier, if you had told David Miller that he'd be kneeling beside his daughter's hospital bed, defending her right to breathe from a neighborhood HOA, he'd have laughed and called it crazy. Back then, life was finally starting to look up. After years of bouncing between apartments, crushing medical bills, and Olivia working night shifts just to keep Sophie's treatments going, they'd finally caught a break. David had landed a stable job with benefits, and for the first time in years, they had enough saved up for a down payment on a home. Not just any home, a 3-bedroom colonial with a ramparty porch and a backyard with enough space for Sophie to garden in the spring. They had chosen Willow Creek because it looked like something out of a movie. White picket fences, lawns so well trimmed they looked artificial, friendly smiles, community cookouts, and according to the listing, an organized HOA to keep the neighborhood safe and pristine. The first week was perfect. Sophie, just 8 years old, was all giggles and questions as she rolled around the sidewalk in her chair, pointing out birds and flowers. Olivia unpacked boxes while humming, finally feeling like they weren't just surviving, but building a life. David took deep breaths every evening, watching the sun dip behind the identical rooftops and thinking, we made it. They met Gloria Phelps during their second week. She showed up at their doorstep with a welcome basket, lemon cookies, HOA guidelines printed on heavy cardstock, and a brittle smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Welcome to Willow Creek," she said, shaking David's hand with a grip that felt more like a warning. "We're so thrilled to have a family who cares about appearances moving in." David smiled politely. Olivia offered to bring cookies to the next HOA meeting. Gloria smiled again, her gaze flicking briefly to Sophie, who was playing with a doll on the porch. "She's yours." Gloria asked, "Our daughter, yes?" Olivia replied warmly. "She's excited to meet the neighborhood kids." Gloria's smile froze for half a second. "Of course. Well, we encourage inclusiveness when it fits the community vision." The sentence didn't land right, but David brushed it off. The next week, a letter arrived in the mailbox, notice of architectural violation. It was about the ramp they'd installed on the front porch. David furrowed his brow. It's a medical necessity. The realtor even said this neighborhood was accessible. The notice said the ramp was non-compliant with the Willow Creek aesthetic standard, citing materials and color tone. The fine was $150. A warning followed. Failure to remove unapproved structures may lead to further action. David showed the letter to Tom Barrett, an older man who lived 2 doors down. Tom had lived in the neighborhood for over 20 years and walked his dog every morning. Tom glanced at the letter and sighed. Gloria strikes quick when she doesn't like something. Don't let her scare you. She's all bark. But this is a disability ramp, David said. Tom nodded. That won't matter to her. Not if she thinks it ruins her clean little postcard world. David returned home shaken. He and Olivia repainted the ramp to match the home siding. They submitted new paperwork to the HOA, trying to comply. Still, 3 days later, another letter came. This time the complaint was about visible toys left in the front yard. Sophie had left a small stuffed unicorn on the porch. I don't understand, Olivia said, eyes wide. She's just a little girl. What do they want? David stared out the window. Across the street, Gloria stood with her arms folded, watching their house from her driveway. He exhaled slowly. Something was off. Terribly off. At first, I thought it was just about rules. But it wasn't. It was about control. And Sophie, with all her joy and difference, didn't fit into their version of perfect. I didn't know it then, but that house wasn't our sanctuary, it was our trap. The third HOA notice arrived tucked inside their mailbox, like a threat, in an envelope. This time, the issue wasn't about the ramp or the stuffed toy unicorn. It was about Sophie's presence at the community park. David stared at the formal language. Residents have expressed concern about the potential safety and liability risks presented by unsupervised motorized equipment in shared public spaces. Motorized equipment? They were talking about Sophie's wheelchair. David's stomach twisted as he read the letter aloud to Olivia at the kitchen table. She gripped her coffee mug so tightly her knuckles turned white. They're calling her a liability? She whispered. She's 8 years old, David said. She's not unsupervised. We've always been there with her. What do they want us to do? Lock her in the house? Neither of them said the thought out loud, but they both felt it, the growing sense that this neighborhood wasn't just unfriendly, it was hostile. That evening, David confronted Gloria Phelps at the HOA's monthly meeting, which was held in the community clubhouse. The room was filled with neat rows of folding chairs, lemonade pitchers, and polite, tight-lipped smiles. "Excuse me," David said, standing up during the open forum portion. "I'd like to discuss the notice we received about our daughter being banned from the park." Gloria, seated at the head table like a judge presiding over court, barely glanced at him. "The community has safety standards, Mr. Miller. If your daughter's equipment, her wheelchair," David interrupted, "is medical, it's not a go-kart. She has every right to be in that park." Gloria gave him a prim, rehearsed smile. "We value all residents, Mr. Miller. But your child's unique circumstances require a different approach to community integration." Several heads nodded around the room. David looked around in disbelief. "She's a little girl who just wants to play." The room was silent. That night, he noticed it for the first time, the sideways glances from neighbors, the half-closed blinds when he walked by, the whispers just out of earshot. The next day, Sophie came home from her short afternoon ride with Olivia, unusually quiet. She didn't say anything the whole way, Olivia told him. Then she asked me if she made people sad. David's heart shattered in his chest. That weekend, he found the first flyer tucked under their front door. Keep our community safe and quiet. Preserve our peaceful values. No names, no signature. Just bold font and a photo of a generic happy family standing in front of a lawn, neat, white, able-bodied. David crumpled the paper in his hand and threw it in the trash. But more came. Folded in between grocery circulars, slipped into their windshield wipers at the store. Olivia found one taped to Sophie's medical supply box on their porch. It wasn't just the HOA anymore. The neighborhood was following Gloria's lead. Tom Barrett stopped David one morning on his usual dog walk. "She's done this before," he muttered, glancing over his shoulder. "Years ago, there was a veteran down the block, wheelchair-bound. Gloria made his life hell until he moved away." David blinked. "And no one said anything?" Tom's eyes darkened. "She's got the board in her pocket. The others are too scared to cross her. She controls the budget, the landscaping contracts, the social events, the image." David swallowed hard. "What about the law? The ADA?" Tom gave a slow shake of his head. "She's careful. Uses words like aesthetic disruption or neighborhood harmony. She never says the quiet part out loud." That night, David sat in Sophie's room while she slept, her chest rising and falling gently under the blanket with cartoon rockets on it. He stared at the soft hum of her medical monitor and thought, how could anyone look at her and see a threat? They didn't care about peace. They cared about control. And Sophie? Sophie was the one thing they couldn't shape, silence, or repaint to match their perfect fences. So they started treating her like a flaw. But I would show them, you don't silence my daughter. Not without going through me. Summer brought heat waves, blooming trees, and something much darker, silence. Not the peaceful kind. Not the quiet you hope for after a long day. This silence was loud, heavy, watchful. David noticed it first at the community barbecue. They had shown up with smiles, a covered dish, and Sophie in her sun hat, excited to finally meet other kids. But when they arrived, conversations dimmed. People shifted. Mother subtly guided her son away from the picnic table Sophie had rolled up to. Olivia pretended not to notice, but her smile faded every time another child was called back to their parent. Sophie just looked around quietly, her little paper plate untouched. The worst part, no one said a word. No one was openly rude. They were just absent, distant, like the Millers were already ghosts in their own neighborhood. Afterward, back at home, Olivia cried in the bathroom while the shower ran. David heard her but didn't say anything. He was too angry, too focused on what he found the next morning. Another anonymous flyer, this time taped to Sophie's wheelchair ramp. Some homes are meant for families, others for special needs facilities. Know the difference. David's hands trembled as he tore it down. The HOA denied responsibility. Gloria's voice was syrupy sweet when David stormed into the office. "Flyers," she said innocently. "We don't distribute anything of that nature. Perhaps your daughter's condition is causing emotional stress. People act out when they feel unsettled." "You're blaming us?" David snapped. "I'm simply observing," she replied, "and offering you a choice. There are communities better suited for unconventional families." He left before he did something he'd regret. But the message had been delivered. Leave, or things will get worse. And they did. The isolation deepens first. The landscaping crew they'd hired stopped showing up. When David called, they said they couldn't work on a restricted property. Then came the trash service suspension. The HOA said their bins were being placed at improper angles, and they'd be fined $75 every time they disrupted the visual flow of the street. One day, Olivia caught a teenager throwing eggs at their ramp. When she tried to confront him, his mother came running over, not to apologize, but to threaten legal action if Olivia so much as looked at her son again. Sophie, meanwhile, started asking questions. "Why don't the other kids want to play with me? Did I do something bad? Is it because of my chair?" David and Olivia did their best to shield her from the ugliness. They painted, baked, watched movies, but the outside world kept pushing in. Then, one night, it escalated again. David had just put Sophie to bed. Olivia was in the kitchen washing dishes when she let out a sharp gasp. "David, come look at this." He ran out. Their garage door had been spray painted. Bright red. Block letters. Leave. Now. Olivia stepped back, hands to her mouth. Sophie wheeled into the hallway. "Mom, what's happening?" David stood frozen for a moment. Then he walked outside into the dark, grabbed the garden hose, and began washing the paint off. His hands were shaking with fury, but his mind was calm. He knew now. This wasn't just about rules or ramps. It was about erasure. They wanted Sophie gone. Not because of anything she had done, but because her existence didn't fit their perfect picture. The final warning 2 days later, another letter arrived. But this one wasn't a fine. It was a petition signed by over a dozen neighbors. It requested a vote at the next HOA meeting to have the Millers evicted for non-compliance with community standards and repeated disruption of neighborhood harmony. David stared at the list of signatures. Some were names of people he'd smiled at during morning walks. People who'd waved at Sophie. People who never said a word. One signature hit hardest. Jessica Lowe, the young woman on the HOA board who had once complimented Olivia's garden and left cookies on their doorstep when they moved in. Something broke in David that day. He placed the petition on the coffee table. "We're not running," he told Olivia. "Not anymore." She nodded. Her hands trembled, but her eyes were steady. "Then we fight." We had followed every rule, paid every fine, stayed polite, and still, they saw our daughter as a stain on their utopia. But Sophie wasn't their problem. She was their mirror, and they couldn't stand what it showed them. So we stopped hiding and started gathering every piece of proof we could find. The air that morning was heavy, like it knew something was about to go terribly wrong. Sophie had been having a good week, at least by their new standards. She was drawing again, laughing at Olivia's silly voices during bedtime stories, and even asked to go back to the park. It had been weeks since they dared to take her near it, but David and Olivia agreed. She deserved a taste of normal. So they went. David packed Sophie's favorite snacks, and Olivia brought a blanket. It was still early, only a few other families were there. David made sure to choose a quiet spot beneath a tree, where Sophie could see the playground but wasn't too close to the others. For a little while, it felt okay. Sophie giggled as Olivia helped her braid dandelions into a bracelet. David took out his phone and started recording. Just something to remember a rare good day. That's when the group of boys arrived. Teenagers, maybe 14 or 15. Loud, obnoxious, and wearing the same smug expressions David had seen too many times on the adults in this neighborhood. They didn't approach it first, just circled. Then one of them pointed at Sophie and whispered something. The others laughed. Olivia stiffened. "Ignore them," she whispered. "Let's not." Then one of the boys shouted, "Hey, the freak's out of her cage." David stood. "That's enough," he barked. The boy sneered. "This is a public park, right? We're just enjoying our community." The other kids started chanting, "HOA, HOA, HOA." Sophie's face twisted with confusion and fear. She began trembling. Her breathing got fast, too fast. David immediately knelt beside her. "It's okay, baby. Just breathe. Look at me. You're okay." But Sophie wasn't okay. She clutched her chest, her tiny hands grasping at nothing. Olivia screamed. "She's having a crisis, David." He already had the emergency oxygen in hand, but Sophie was panicking, flailing, gasping. Her eyes rolled back. "Call 911. Olivia shouted. The teens ran off laughing as David lowered Sophie gently to the grass. Her lips were turning blue. Minutes passed like hours. When the ambulance finally arrived, David rode with her, clutching her hand, whispering the same words over and over. "You're okay. Stay with me. You're okay. Please." At the hospital, the emergency team worked fast. Tubes, masks, beeping monitors. Olivia stood outside the room, frozen, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. David paced, numb and furious. A doctor emerged. She's stable, he said, but she's going into a protective coma. Her brain activity is strong, but she's not conscious. We've placed her on assisted breathing while we monitor swelling. David nodded numbly. He couldn't speak. He couldn't even cry. He just walked into the ICU and sat beside her. Sophie, their bright, beautiful daughter, lay motionless, tubes everywhere. He held her hand again. "I'm so sorry," he whispered. Gloria returns that night, long after Olivia had gone home to get Sophie's meds and change clothes. Gloria Phelps walked into the hospital room. Again, uninvited. She didn't knock, didn't ask permission, just walked in with a manila folder in one hand and a cold expression carved into her face. David stood up. "Get out. I'm here as a representative of the HOA, she said. I understand your daughter's condition has worsened. I'm truly sorry." He stared at her, jaw tight. She continued, "But we can't allow this situation to drag on indefinitely. It's become a matter of community stability." She opened the folder and laid a printed document on Sophie's hospital table. David didn't even look at it. "You're filing complaints while my daughter's fighting for her life?" "David," she said with false calm, "we're not trying to be cruel. But the neighborhood is experiencing a lot of anxiety. Children are frightened. Property values are dipping. Families are uncomfortable. If you would consider taking the compassionate route." David's blood turned to ice. "You want me to take her off life support?" Gloria's expression didn't change. "You don't need to say it that way. You can say it's for peace, for closure, for the good of everyone." David laughed, not from humor, from horror. "Get out." She picked up the folder, not breaking eye contact. "We'll be proceeding with community arbitration. But you should know you're fighting a losing battle." She left, heels clicking. David sat down again, looked at Sophie, and whispered, "They think you're weak. They have no idea who they're dealing with." That was the moment it all changed. My daughter was in a coma, and they saw an opportunity to bury her, and us. But they didn't realize that moment didn't break me. It woke me up. The hospital room became a second home, cold, quiet, and filled with the unnatural hum of machines that kept Sophie alive. Every beep, every mechanical breath reminded David that time was ticking, that every moment was a silent battle against the unthinkable. Olivia barely spoke those first few days. She'd sit beside Sophie and whisper old bedtime stories, brushing her daughter's hair like she still felt her respond. Her strength was quiet but unbreakable, and it terrified David to see it bend. Outside the hospital, Gloria Phelps wasn't slowing down. Legal pressure begins. The first sign came on the third day, a certified letter delivered directly to David in the hospital lobby. Notice of formal community arbitration hearing. You are hereby summoned by the Willow Creek Homeowners Association to attend a hearing regarding multiple violations of community peace and aesthetic guidelines, as well as unresolved complaints regarding a health-disruptive presence within the neighborhood. David crumpled it in his fist. It wasn't just a threat now. It was war. The infiltration later that night, as David sat alone while Olivia went home to shower, the door creaked open. A nurse? No. Jessica Lowe, the young HOA board member who had once brought them cookies. David stood sharply. "What the hell are you doing here?" She held up her hands. "Wait, I'm not here with Gloria. I swear. I came alone." He didn't speak, just stared. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "I didn't know she'd go this far. None of us did. But I saw the petition. I saw how she twisted everything. And I can't sleep anymore." David crossed his arms. "You signed it." She looked down, ashamed. I thought it would just be a formality. She said it would never come to anything, that it was for documentation. I didn't know she'd do this." David didn't forgive her, but he listened. Jessica reached into her bag and handed him a flash drive. "What is this?" he asked. "Emails, recordings, HOA chat logs. You need to see what she's really been doing." The truth revealed that night, David borrowed Olivia's laptop and sat in the corner of Sophie's hospital room while the machines ticked beside him. What he found on the drive made his blood run cold. emails between Gloria and other HOA board members referring to Sophie as a permanent stain on neighborhood value. Group chat messages mocking Sophie's wheelchair ramp, calling it an eyesore and a burden on buyer confidence. A line from Gloria herself: "Some lives cost more than they're worth. And in this case, they're dragging us all down." David gritted his teeth so hard his jaw hurt. But it wasn't just the hate, it was the strategy. Gloria had created a system of bullying and eviction disguised as community standards. Over the past 6 years, four families had voluntarily moved after repeated HOA targeting, each with a disabled child, elderly parent, or visibly ill family member. She had even looped in code enforcement officers, pressuring them to file safety violations against homes she wanted out. It was a machine, and Sophie had just become its latest target. The missing family one folder in the files chilled David to his core. The Robinsons, a family who'd lived in Willow Creek 5 years ago, their son had severe autism. Within a year, their home had been foreclosed, their names wiped from community records. David searched their name online. Nothing. No forwarding address. No school records. No paper trail. It was like they never existed. The lawyer David didn't waste time. The next morning, he called Blake Harmon, a civil rights attorney known for fighting HOA discrimination cases. Blake was direct, sharp, and skeptical until David showed him the flash drive. "Jesus," Blake muttered, scrolling through the chat logs. "This is textbook abuse of power. She's not just violating ADA law, she's orchestrating hate under the guise of policy." "I want to go public," David said. "You will. But first, we build the case so tight they can't wriggle out." The gathering stormed Blake, and David spent the next 3 days working quietly. Jessica agreed to testify. Tom Barrett gave a sworn statement about the veteran who was pushed out. Olivia dug through old HOA newsletters and found one that subtly hinted the Robinsons had made the right decision by relocating. Meanwhile, Sophie's condition remained unchanged. But David talked to her every night, read her stories, told her about the people rising up for her. And he made a promise. "You just hang in there, baby. You let me do the heavy lifting now. I don't care if I have to burn that HOA down brick by brick. I'm going to make them remember your name. And they're going to choke on their silence." A public line is crossed on the 5th night. A local news story broke. Family accuses HOA of discrimination over disabled child on life support. It started small. An online article with no comments. But Jessica leaked the chat logs to the outlet, and then everything exploded. David's phone rang nonstop. Neighbors who once ignored them were now texting apologies. The HOA website was taken offline. And Gloria? She doubled down. The next morning, Gloria's lawyer sent David a cease and desist letter accusing him of harassment and defamation. David just laughed. "You never think it'll be you. You never think you'll go from homeowner to whistleblower. But if you push a father too far, if you try to erase his daughter from existence, you better be ready for what comes next." What began as a father's desperate fight for justice was now a state-level civil rights investigation. By week's end, 3 major news outlets had picked up the story: disabled girl targeted by HOA, property values over compassion, father fights back after HOA demands daughter be removed from life support, disability discrimination in the suburbs, the Willow Creek War. And while David would have done anything to go back in time and spare Sophie from pain, he couldn't ignore the shift. People were finally listening. The Attorney General's office calls Blake Harmon answered the call first. "David," he said, barely containing his excitement, "the Attorney General's Disability Rights Division wants to launch an inquiry." They read the emails. "This isn't just an HOA abuse case now. This is potential systemic civil rights suppression." David didn't say anything at first. He was sitting beside Sophie, who still lay unconscious, machines whirring steadily around her. "She'd be proud of you," Blake added gently. "I just want her to open her eyes," David said. "That's all." The HOA melts down. Meanwhile, the Willow Creek HOA board was imploding from the inside. 2 board members resigned the moment the subpoenas hit. Jessica Lowe, who had once been complicit, now stood front and center in media interviews, condemning the abuse of power and calling Gloria a danger to vulnerable families. Then came the FBI knock. Not for David, for Gloria, because among the leaked documents was a series of financial inconsistencies, fines issued to homeowners without record, HOA funds redirected through community improvement grants with no evidence of work being done, kickbacks between local code inspectors and HOA executives for eviction-enabling citations. It wasn't just immoral. It was criminal. Gloria's last strike, but Gloria wasn't done yet. Late one night, Olivia came rushing into the hospital, out of breath and shaking. "They broke into the house," she gasped. The front door was kicked in. Everything's trashed, every file, every picture. Even Sophie's artwork. They took the flash drive copies. David stood, eyes burning. "She's trying to destroy the evidence." Fortunately, they had already backed everything up to cloud, but it was the message behind the break-in that mattered. Gloria had nothing left to lose, and she was getting dangerous. Sophie's turn then, as if the universe was responding to the rising chaos. Sophie moved her fingers. It was Olivia who saw it first. She gasped, called the nurse, and within moments the room was buzzing with doctors. A day later, Sophie opened her eyes for the first time in nearly 2 weeks. Weak, confused, silent, but alive. David wept at her bedside. "I kept my promise," he whispered. "Now it's your turn to keep fighting. Just a little longer." The community flips. The next HOA meeting was historic. David arrived with Blake and Jessica by his side. The room was packed, standing room only, filled with neighbors who had once avoided eye contact. Now they were furious. A man in the back stood and shouted, "We trusted you, Gloria. My son has Down syndrome. Were you coming for us next?" Another woman raised her phone and showed a picture of her elderly mother. "You called my mother's wheelchair ramp visual pollution. Shame on you." It was a revolt. Gloria, still smug, tried to speak, but the crowd wasn't having it. She was booed out of her own meeting. David takes the stand a week later. At a state hearing, David was invited to give public testimony. He walked into the courtroom, took a deep breath, and told everything: the threats, the humiliation, the break-in, the harassment. The moment Gloria stood in his daughter's hospital room and asked him to let her die. "They didn't see my daughter as a person," he said, voice shaking. "They saw her as a line item on a property value report. And for that, they tried to bury her. But you can't bury a child whose father's still breathing." The room was silent. Then standing ovation. Arrests and resignations within 48 hours. Gloria Phelps was arrested on fraud and conspiracy charges. 2 more board members were indicted for their roles in coordinated evictions. The HOA was temporarily dissolved under state authority pending a full audit. Code enforcement officials were placed under internal review, and the state launched an emergency bill named after David's daughter, the Sophie Grace Protection Act, banning discriminatory HOA actions against families with medical needs. Back at home, Sophie came home 3 weeks later. She couldn't walk yet. Her muscles were weak. But she smiled. She laughed when Olivia sang. She gripped David's fingers when he read her stories. And on their front lawn, a new sign stood tall, not from the HOA, from the neighbors. "Welcome home. Sophie, we missed you. You matter." They said my daughter was a burden, that her life made them uncomfortable, that her existence lowered their property value. But now, her name is on a law. Her story is on every screen, and they will never erase her again. 3 months later, Willow Creek neighborhood, rebuilt, reborn, remembering. Fall leaves rustled across the sidewalks. The once pristine, rule-obsessed neighborhood of Willow Creek had changed, not just in policy, but in soul. The manicured perfection had been replaced with something far more beautiful: humanity. Gone were the petty citations and anonymous complaints. New HOA board elections had brought in parents, teachers, veterans, people who understood that community wasn't about property value, but people. Sophie's strength had returned slowly, but her smile came back quickly. With physical therapy and fierce determination, She took her first assisted steps in the backyard, holding tightly to her father's hands. Olivia cried, snapping photos. David could barely breathe, overwhelmed by the sight of his daughter fighting her way back to life. Each morning, Sophie asked if she could walk to the front porch ramp, and every evening, she sat there, waving to neighbors, greeting kids, even drawing with sidewalk chalk. The same ramp they once called an eyesore was now covered in flowers and bright drawings. Sophie's steps. You are loved. Keep climbing. Gloria's trial, the trial, was the most watched courtroom broadcast in the state's history. Gloria Phelps, once the unchallenged queen of Willow Creek, now sat in an orange jumpsuit, her smirk wiped away by the weight of national scrutiny. She faced 18 felony charges, including fraud, conspiracy, and civil rights violations. Her defense was weak, claiming ignorance, blaming the board, and insisting her comments were taken out of context. But then the prosecution played the security footage. The moment in the hospital room when she looked Olivia in the eyes and said, "She's going to die anyway. Why make us all suffer while you drag it out?" Gasps echoed through the courtroom. The jury deliberated for just 6 hours. Guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison, no chance of parole for the first 12. The impact the case triggered nationwide reforms. 42 HOAs across the country were audited. 7 were dissolved after evidence of discriminatory practices. Several states adopted Sophie's law equivalents. HUD-US, Department of Housing and Urban Development, launched a new division to handle HOA-based discrimination. Sophie's name was suddenly in newspapers, news feeds, podcasts. But it wasn't just headlines, it was hope. A new chapter begins at a community gathering held on Sophie's 9th birthday. The mayor arrived to cut a ribbon in front of the newly renamed Willow Grace Park, a place where children of all abilities could play together. David gave a speech. His voice was calm but powerful. 3 months ago, my daughter nearly died, and not just from her medical condition, but from a system designed to erase people like her. But you all stood up. And today, we don't just live in a neighborhood. We live in a community. Sophie stood next to him in her new purple walker, smiling for the crowd. The final visit before the story could truly end, David took one final trip. He visited the grave site of the Robinson family's son, whose name he had found after months of digging. Their tragedy had been buried. No justice, no headlines. He laid a flower there. Kneeling down, he whispered, "You mattered. You were the warning they ignored. But Sophie lit the fire, and we carried your story too." Closing montage, as seen in a cinematic documentary finale, Olivia teaching art therapy classes to parents of disabled children. Sophie laughing, painting the wheels of her walker neon pink. Jessica Lowe testifying at Congress about HOA reform. A new family moving into Willow Creek, their daughter has Down syndrome. The community bakes them welcome cookies. David watching the sunset from a porch, Sophie beside him, her head on his shoulder. I used to think protecting my daughter meant keeping her quiet, small, hidden from judgment. But I was wrong. Protecting her means raising her voice so loud that no one like Gloria Phelps can ever silence it again. She is not broken. She is not a burden. She is the reason this place is finally whole. Subscribe for more true inspired narratives of justice, survival, and standing up for what's right, even when no one else will.